Lecture 19 of the Varieties of Religious Experience. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. Lecture 19. Other Characteristics. We have wound our way back, after our excursion through mysticism and philosophy, to where we were before. The uses of religion, its uses to the individual who has it, and the uses of the individual himself to the world, are the best arguments that truth is in it. We return to the empirical philosophy. The true is what works well, even though the qualification "on the whole" may always have to be added. In this lecture we must revert to description again, and finish our picture of the religious consciousness by a word about some of its other characteristic elements. Then, in a final lecture, we shall be free to make a general review and draw our independent conclusions. The first point I will speak of is the part which the aesthetic life plays in determining one's choice of a religion. Men, I said a while ago, involuntarily intellectualize their religious experience. They need formulas, just as they need fellowship in worship. I spoke, therefore, too contemptuously of the pragmatic uselessness of the famous scholastic list of attributes of the deity, for they have one use which I neglected to consider. The eloquent passage in which Newman enumerates them puts us on the track of it. Intoning them as he would intone a cathedral service, he shows how high is their aesthetic value. It enriches our bare piety to carry these exalted and mysterious verbal additions, just as it enriches a church to have an organ and old brasses, marbles and frescoes and stained windows. Epithets lend an atmosphere and overtones to our devotion. They are like a hymn of praise and service of glory, and may sound the more sublime for being incomprehensible. Minds like Newman's grow as jealous of their credit as heathen priests are of that of the jewelry and ornaments that blaze upon their idols. Footnote: Newman's imagination so innately craved an ecclesiastical system that he can write, quote, "From the age of 15, dogma has been the fundamental principle of my religion. I know no other religion. I cannot enter into the idea of any other sort of religion." Close quote. And again, speaking of himself about the age of 30, he writes, quote, "I loved to act as feeling myself in my bishop's sight, as if it were the sight of God." Close quote. End footnote. Among the buildings out of religion which the mind spontaneously indulges in, the aesthetic motive must never be forgotten. I promised to say nothing of ecclesiastical systems in these lectures. I may be allowed, however, to put in a word at this point on the way in which their satisfaction of certain aesthetic needs contributes to their hold on human nature. Although some persons aim most at intellectual purity and simplification, for others richness is the supreme imaginative requirement. Footnote: The intellectual difference is quite on a par in practical importance with the analogous difference in character. We saw, under the head of saintliness, how some characters resent confusion and must live in purity, consistency, simplicity. For others, on the contrary, superabundance, overpressure, stimulation, lots of superficial relations are indispensable. There are men who would suffer a very syncope if you should pay all their debts, bring it about that their engagements had been kept, their letters answered, their perplexities relieved, and their duties fulfilled, down to one which lay on a clean table under their eyes, with nothing to interfere with its immediate performance. A day stripped so staringly bare would be for them appalling. So with ease, elegance, tributes of affections, social recognitions, some of us require amounts of these things which to others would appear a mass of lying and sophistication. End footnote. When one's mind is strongly of this type, an individual religion will hardly serve the purpose. The inner need is rather of something institutional and complex, majestic in the hierarchic interrelatedness of its parts, with authority descending from stage to stage, and at every stage objects for adjectives of mystery and splendor, derived in the last resort from the Godhead who is the fountain and culmination of the system. One feels then as if in presence of some vast encrusted work of jewelry or architecture. One hears the multitudinous liturgical appeal. One gets the honorific vibration coming from every quarter. Compared with such a noble complexity, in which ascending and descending movements seem in no way to jar upon stability, in which no single item, however humble, is insignificant, because so many august institutions hold it in its place, how flat does evangelical Protestantism appear, how bare the atmosphere of those isolated religious lives whose boast it is that man in the bush with God may meet. What a pulverization and leveling of what a glorious piled-up structure! To an imagination used to the perspectives of dignity and glory, the naked gospel scheme seems to offer an almshouse for a palace. It is much like the patriotic sentiment of those brought up in ancient empires. How many emotions must be frustrated of their object when one gives up the titles of dignity, the crimson lights and blare of brass, the gold embroidery, the plumed troops, the fear and trembling, and puts up with a president in a black coat who shakes hands with you and comes, it may be, from a home upon a veldt or prairie with one sitting room and a Bible in its center table. It pauperizes the monarchical imagination. The strength of these aesthetic sentiments make it rigorously impossible, it seems to me, that Protestantism, however superior in spiritual profundity it may be to Catholicism, should, at the present day, succeed in making many converts from the more venerable ecclesiasticism. The latter offers a so much richer pasturage and shade to the fancy, has so many cells with so many different kinds of honey, is so indulgent in its multiform appeals to human nature, that Protestantism will always show to Catholic eyes the almshouse physiognomy. The bitter negativity of it is, to the Catholic mind, incomprehensible. To intellectual Catholics, many of the antiquated beliefs and practices to which the Church gives countenance are, if taken literally, as childish as they are to Protestants. But they are childish in the pleasing sense of childlike, innocent and amiable, and worthy to be smiled on in consideration of the undeveloped condition of the dear people's intellects. To the Protestant, on the contrary, they are childish in the sense of being idiotic falsehoods. He must stamp out their delicate and lovable redundancy, leaving the Catholic to shudder at his literalness. He appears to the latter as morose as if he were some hard-eyed, numb, monotonous kind of reptile. The two will never understand each other. Their centers of emotional energy are too different. Rigorous truth and human nature's intricacies are always in need of a mutual interpreter. Footnote: compare the informality of Protestantism, where the meek lover of the good, alone with his God, visits the sick, etc., for their own sakes, with the elaborate business that goes on in Catholic devotion, and carries with it the social excitement of all more complex businesses. An essentially worldly-minded Catholic woman can become a visit of the sick on purely coquettish principles, with her confessor and director, her merits storing up, her patron saints, her privileged relation to the Almighty, drawing his attention as a professional devotee, her definite exercises, and her definitely recognized social pose in the organization. End footnote. So much for the aesthetic diversities in the religious consciousness. In most books on religion, three things are represented as its most essential elements. These are sacrifice, confession, and prayer. I must say a word in turn of each of these elements, though briefly. First, of sacrifice.